The wind came down from the hills like it had a message to deliver, cold and restless, sweeping across the dry grass and rattling every loose board in town. Folks said the land remembered things long after people tried to forget them. That morning, smoke rose, steady and gray from the northern hillside, curling into the pale sky where no chimney had stood for years. Men stopped hammering fence posts. Women paused at wash lines. Even the horses shifted uneasily as if they sensed something returning that ought to have stayed buried. 17 was too young to be turned out into the world, but the frontier had never cared much for fairness. One hard winter, one bad harvest, and a family could lose patience quicker than crops failed. The boy walked away from town with everything he owned tied inside a worn blanket slung over his shoulder. Behind him were slammed doors and words that could not be taken back. Ahead lay miles of open country, sharp wains, and the uncertain promise that somewhere beyond the hills a person could begin again. He followed an old wagon trail barely visible beneath dust and weeds, boots scraping against stones polished smooth by years of travel. Travelers once used that road during the gold rush days, or so the older folks claimed. Now it led nowhere anyone cared to go. The hills beyond were known for strange echoes and abandoned claims, places where cabins collapsed into the earth and memories faded with the seasons. By late afternoon, hunger gnawed at him and the cold crept through his coat. That was when he saw it, smoke, thin at first, almost easy to mistake for fog, rising from the slope ahead. Relief spread through him faster than caution. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth, maybe food, maybe kindness from strangers who remembered what it meant to struggle. But something felt wrong the closer he walked. The hillside looked empty. Snow clung to patches of ground where the sun never reached, and scrub trees leaned crookly against the wind. There was no roofline, no fence, no sound of chopping wood or barking dogs. Only the steady trail of smoke drifting upward as if from an invisible hearth. He circled once, then again, boots crunching softly. The smell reached him next, wood smoke mixed with something older, earthier, like damp soil turned over after years of stillness. He brushed aside tall grass and found a narrow opening cut into the hill itself, almost hidden unless you stood directly before it. Warm air slipped out, carrying flickers of orange light. Someone lived here after all. Inside, the space was small but carefully kept. A stove glowed at the center, its fire alive and crackling. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, tools, and neatly folded blankets. A single chair sat near the flames, and beside it lay an open book as if its reader had only stepped away for a moment. Everything felt lived in, yet strangely silent. No footsteps, no voices. No sign of the person who had lit the fire. The boy hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether to call out or turn back. The warmth pulled at him stronger than caution ever could. Outside, the wind howled louder, pushing snow across the hillside and erasing his tracks one by one. He stepped inside. Behind him, unseen from the doorway, figures appeared along the ridge above. Travelers moving slowly through the storm stopped when they noticed the smoke rising from the hill. They stared down at the place where no cabin had stood for decades, exchanging uneasy glances. One of them whispered that the fire should not be burning. And as the boy reached toward the stove, the door behind him shifted slightly on its own, closing with a quiet sound that echoed deeper than the small room should have allowed. The sound of the door settling into place made the boy turn quickly, his hands still stretched toward the stove. For a moment he thought someone had entered behind him, but the room remained empty. Only the fire moved, its light dancing across the wooden walls and throwing long shadows that shifted like living things. He swallowed hard, telling himself the wind must have pushed the door. Out on the frontier, strange noises were common companions. The warmth felt too good to question. He crouched near the stove, rubbing his hands together until the sting of cold faded from his fingers. Whoever lived here had stacked wood neatly beside the fire, each log cut clean and even. A kettle rested on top, whispering softly as steam curled upward. The smell reminded him of evenings long ago, before arguments filled his home and silence replaced laughter. He called out once, his voice unsure. No answer came. Only the faint creak of timber settling into the hillside. On the shelves sat rows of jars filled with dried beans, herbs, and preserved vegetables. Nothing looked abandoned. Dust had not gathered, and the blankets were folded with care. Someone returned here often, someone careful, someone who valued order in a land where survival rarely allowed it. Near the chair, he noticed a pair of boots placed side by side, worn but recently cleaned. And that detail unsettled him more than anything else. A lived-in room without its owner felt wrong, like stepping into a conversation that had stopped mid-sentence. Outside, the wind carried distant voices down from the ridge, though he could not make out the words. The travelers who had seen the smoke were making their way closer, moving carefully along the slope. They had followed that trail before years earlier, when rumors spread about a hillside cabin that appeared only in winter. Most dismissed the stories as campfire talk meant to pass long nights, but seeing smoke rise again stirred memories none of them wished to revisit. One older traveler paused, gripping his walking stick tighter. He remembered a settlement that once stood near this hill, a handful of families trying to farm stubborn land. A fire had taken it during a brutal storm many winters ago. Afterward, people claimed to see smoke where no house remained, but searches always turned up nothing but frozen ground. Inside the hidden dwelling, the boy found a small table pushed against the wall. Carved into its surface were marks counting days or years, lines grouped carefully in sets. He traced them with his fingers, realizing whoever stayed here had spent a long time alone. A folded paper rested beneath a tin cup. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he should touch another person's belongings, yet curiosity won over manners. The writing was steady but faded with age. It spoke of harsh winters, lost travelers, and a promise to keep the fire burning for anyone who needed shelter. The words carried a quiet kindness that tightened his chest. Whoever wrote them believed someone would come someday, someone desperate enough to follow smoke into the hills. A sudden knock echoed faintly through the earth itself, not from the door but from somewhere deeper in the hillside. The boy froze. The sound came again, dull and distant, like something shifting behind the walls. He stepped back from the stove, listening carefully. The fire crackled on, unaware of his growing unease. Outside, the travelers finally reached the entrance hidden by grass and stone. Warm air brushed their faces, confirming what their eyes already feared. One of them muttered that the ground here had been empty since the old tragedy. Another insisted they should leave before dark swallowed the ridge. But the smoke kept rising, steady and inviting. Inside, the boy noticed something else. The counting marks on the table ended abruptly, the final line carved deeper than the others as if made in haste. Beside it lay a small object wrapped in cloth. As he reached toward it, the knocking sound grew louder beneath his feet, followed by a faint tremor that rattled the jars along the shelf. Above him, unseen, the travelers exchanged nervous looks, realizing the smoke was not fading as it should. And deep within the hillside something shifted again, as though aware that someone new had finally stepped inside. The trembling beneath the floor faded as quickly as it had begun, leaving the boy standing in uneasy silence. The jars stopped rattling, and the fire returned to its steady rhythm as if nothing unusual had happened. He told himself it was only the hill settling. Cold ground shifted all the time during winter. Still, the air felt heavier now, charged with a quiet pressure that made him glance over his shoulder again and again. His fingers hovered over the cloth-wrapped object on the table. Whoever had lived here counted days carefully, kept supplies in order, and wrote about sheltering strangers. That thought should have comforted him, yet it raised another question. If this place existed to help lost travelers, why did it feel like a secret meant to stay hidden? Outside, the travelers stood at the entrance, uncertain whether to call out. Snow gathered on their coats while smoke drifted past their faces, warm against the bitter air. The oldest among them finally spoke, his voice low and uneasy. He said he remembered a young homesteader who built into the hillside years ago, claiming the earth kept heat better than timber cabins. Folks thought him clever at first. Then came the fire that destroyed the nearby settlement. After that, the hillside dwelling was never found again. Another traveler argued that stories change with time. Cabins do not simply vanish, someone must have rebuilt it. Yet none of them could explain why the smoke appeared only during the harshest winters, or why earlier searches found nothing but rock and frozen soil. Inside, the boy unwrapped the cloth slowly. A small metal compass lay inside, its glass scratched but polished clean. The needle trembled wildly, spinning without settling. He turned it in his hand, expecting it to steady, but it refused to point north. The movement made his stomach tighten. Out here, direction meant survival. A broken compass was worse than none at all. The knocking sound returned, louder now, followed by a faint scraping beneath the floorboards. He stepped back quickly, heart racing. The sound traveled from one side of the room to the other, as if something moved through hidden tunnels beneath the cabin. He considered rushing outside, yet the storm howled stronger than before, wind pressing against the door like a living force determined to keep him inside. He called out again, louder this time, asking if anyone was there. His voice echoed strangely, returning a moment later from somewhere below rather than from the walls around him. On the ridge, one traveler finally gathered the courage to step forward and push the door open. Warm light spilled out onto the snow, revealing the boy standing near the table. Relief crossed the travelers' faces, mixed with confusion. They had expected emptiness, not a living soul. The boy turned sharply at the sight of them. For a moment, both sides simply stared. Strangers meeting in a place none of them fully understood. Questions crowded the air before anyone spoke. The oldest traveler asked how long the fire had been burning. The boy admitted he had only just arrived and found it already lit. That answer deepened the man's concern. He stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning every corner as if searching for something missing rather than something present. He noticed the counting marks on the table and ran his fingers across them. His expression darkened. He whispered that the marks matched stories told by survivors long ago, tales of someone who promised to guide lost souls through winter storms. Some believed the hillside protected travelers. Others claimed it trapped them. A sudden draft swept through the room, though the door stood closed again. The fire flared higher, casting shadows that stretched across the ceiling like reaching hands. The compass in the boy's palm spun faster, ticking faintly with each turn. From beneath the floor came a deeper sound, not knocking now, but a slow shifting, as if the hill itself breathed. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. One traveler backed toward the entrance, whispering that they should leave while they still could. But when he pulled at the door, it refused to open. The warmth that once felt welcoming now pressed in from every side. The travelers exchanged uneasy looks, realizing they were no longer visitors seeking shelter from the storm. They were inside something that had been waiting. The door would not move no matter how hard they pulled. One traveler pressed his shoulder against it while another lifted the latch again and again. But the wood held firm, as if the hillside itself had decided they were meant to stay. The boy felt the warmth turn heavy in his lungs, no longer comforting but watchful. Outside, the storm roared louder, wind sweeping across the hill in long, angry gusts that rattled the hidden dwelling. The older traveler stepped away from the door, breathing slowly as though forcing calm into the room. He said panic would only make matters worse. Places like this, he claimed, followed their own rules. The boy noticed how carefully the man chose his words, avoiding anything that sounded like fear. That alone made the boy more uneasy. The floor trembled again, stronger this time. A low rumble passed beneath them, shaking dust loose from the beams. The fire surged higher without anyone touching it, flames stretching upward with unnatural strength. Shadows crawled across the walls, bending and shifting until they almost resembled figures standing just beyond sight. One traveler whispered that the smoke was growing thicker outside. Through a small window carved into the hillside, gray clouds swirled close to the ground, circling rather than drifting away. It looked less like smoke escaping and more like something gathering. The boy tightened his grip on the spinning compass. Its needle now moved so fast it blurred, ticking louder with each rotation. The sound matched the rhythm of the trembling ground, as if both followed the same hidden pulse. He remembered the note on the table, the promise to keep the fire burning for those who needed shelter. Maybe the fire was not simply warmth. Maybe it was a signal. The older traveler began searching the room with urgency, examining shelves, walls, and corners. He explained that frontier stories often held pieces of truth buried beneath superstition. If someone built this place to guide lost people through storms, there must be a way to leave safely. Nothing meant for protection would trap its guests forever. The boy thought about being cast out at 17, about walking alone through freezing wind with nowhere to belong. The cabin had welcomed him when nothing else did. That realization struck him deeply. What if the hillside responded to need itself? What if it held on to those who arrived carrying too much loss? Another tremor shook the room, stronger than before. A crack formed along the far wall, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness beneath the cabin. Warm air rushed upward from the opening, carrying the scent of earth and old smoke. The fire dimmed slightly, as though waiting. No one moved at first. The travelers exchanged uncertain looks. The passage seemed both invitation and warning. From below came a faint echo, not quite a voice yet, not entirely natural either. The sound rose and fell like distant breathing. The older traveler said the hill might be asking something of them. Perhaps every person who found this place played a part in keeping the fire alive. Perhaps someone long ago never finished what they began. The boy felt a strange pull toward the opening. Fear remained, yet beneath it stirred a quiet certainty he could not explain. Since arriving, the cabin had reacted most strongly to him. The door closed after he entered. The compass spun in his hand alone. The counting marks ended as if waiting for another line to be carved. Outside, the storm intensified, snow slamming against the hillside. Light flickered wildly as the fire bent toward the opening in the floor, flames leaning downward instead of up. The travelers realized time was running short. If the hill collapsed or the fire died, none of them might survive the night. The boy stepped closer to the passage, heart pounding. Heat rose from below, steady and alive, yet the darkness beyond swallowed all detail. Behind him, the travelers watched in silence, sensing that whatever happened next would decide whether the hillside remained a refuge or became a prison. The compass suddenly stopped spinning. Its needle pointed straight toward the opening, and from deep within the hill, the unseen presence stirred once more, waiting for someone to take the next step. The compass stayed still in the boy's hand, its needle fixed toward the dark passage beneath the cabin. The trembling in the hillside eased for a moment, as if the earth itself waited for a choice. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward him. He felt it clearly now, a quiet understanding settling where fear had been. The fire had not called the travelers. It had called someone who needed a place to belong as much as others needed saving. He stepped closer to the opening. Warm air wrapped around him, carrying the steady heartbeat of the hill. The older traveler reached out as if to stop him, then hesitated. Something in the boy's expression made him lower his hand. This was not recklessness. It was recognition. The boy remembered the carved lines on the table, the final deep mark cut in haste. Whoever built this shelter had kept count of every winter, every life guided safely through storms. Maybe the counting stopped because the keeper never returned from below. Maybe the promise remained unfinished. He crouched near the passage and spoke aloud, unsure who might hear. He said he understood what it meant to be left alone. He said no one should face the cold without shelter. His voice echoed downward, softer each time until silence followed. The fire behind him flared gently, no longer wild. Its light warmed the room with a calm glow. The spinning smoke outside slowed, drifting upward instead of circling. Encouraged, he took a careful step into the passage. The tunnel sloped downward only a short distance before opening into a small chamber carved from stone. At its center rested an old iron firebox connected to the stove above by thick metal pipes. Ash lay piled high, untouched for years. The warmth came not from fresh wood, but from embers that refused to die completely, glowing faintly as if waiting for breath. Beside the firebox lay a weathered journal and a lantern long burned out. The boy understood then. The keeper of the hillside had tended the fire through countless winters, guiding lost travelers with smoke rising as a signal of safety. One storm must have taken the keeper before the task could be passed on. The fire endured, but without care it struggled, calling out for someone new. He added fresh wood from a nearby stack, hand steady despite the weight of the moment. When the flames caught, light filled the chamber, traveling through the pipes and roaring back into the cabin above. The ground shuddered once more, then settled completely. Upstairs, the travelers felt the change immediately. The door creaked open on its own, letting in clean winter air. The storm outside softened, winds losing their anger as clouds began to break apart. Smoke rose straight into the sky, strong and steady, no longer trapped near the hill. The boy returned to the main room carrying the journal. The older traveler read its first pages quietly, then smiled with relief. The writing spoke of a simple mission: keep the fire alive so no wanderer would freeze alone. The hillside was never meant to trap anyone. It only held those willing to carry the responsibility forward. Understanding spread among them. The cabin had chosen its new keeper not through magic alone, but through need and kindness. A person cast out had found purpose instead of despair. The boy walked to the table and carved a new line beside the final mark. The sound of the knife against wood felt certain and right. Outside, sunlight broke through clouds, touching the snow with gold. For the first time since leaving home, he did not feel lost. The travelers prepared to leave, thanking him before stepping into the clearing sky. They promised to tell others that smoke in the hills meant warmth, safety, and hope. No longer a mystery to fear, the cabin became a place remembered with gratitude. As evening settled, the boy sat beside the stove, feeding the fire while wind moved gently across the hillside. The cabin felt alive but peaceful now, its purpose clear. He realized being turned away at 17 had not ended his story. It had led him here, where loneliness turned into responsibility and hardship into belonging. Smoke rose steadily into the quiet sky, a signal to anyone wandering the frontier that they were not alone. And in the glow of the firelight, the hillside keeper watched the flames with calm certainty, ready for the next traveler who might one day follow the promise carried on the wind.